From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Prince William is off to Saudi Arabia, a well-beaten desert path for British royals looking to curry favour on behalf of our government. The visits can often be fun and games, sword dances, lavish dinners. Do yourself a favour and search online for a picture of then Prince Charles in full Arabian dress, complete with golden sword, dagger and an ammunition belt. But is the task harder for Prince William in 2026? What with the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia still accused of overseeing the murder of a journalist?
The United Nations has just issued its report on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi journalist was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October last year. The CIA and some Western countries believe Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, ordered the killing. Saudi officials have always denied this.
For all its recent modernising, Saudi Arabia is still a country with a dismal human rights record. It's not a place you'd want to stand trial. They still execute people for being gay, for protesting, but they have a lot of money.
Huge opportunities for the UK and for Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries to access UK capital markets, to have our services businesses, whether it's insurance, financial services, or indeed education and health.
Our government wants to do more business with them, but at what moral cost? And is Prince William the one to walk this tightrope? The story today: Prince William, diplomatic secret weapon.
Overseas royal visits do tend to be quite a song and dance.
Roy Nikart is royal editor at The Sunday Times and hosts the Royals podcast. She's been on more royal trips than you've had hot dinners and will be following Prince William to Saudi Arabia.
We seem to have the royal family at the moment on some sort of Middle East love-in, because we've just had Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, last week in Dubai on official business, and William is going to Saudi. This is the only trip that William is doing this year on behalf of the government so far. And they've asked him to go, and effectively sort of at the heart of it is trade investment, by which you can read money. And it's the UK government's attempt to solidify, I think, and build on the relationship with Saudi Arabia, because we had Keir Starmer going there in 2024. We had Rachel Reeves going there not so long ago. There are various free trade arrangements that are still being negotiated that I think that the UK government is keen to kind of get over the line. And William, who's been out to the Middle East before a few times, he's been to Oman, he's been to Dubai, of course he's been to Israel and the OPT. I think the government is increasingly keen to deploy William on these missions because they've seen how well some other world leaders, like Donald Trump, respond to him. And, I think William is very alive to the fact that a trip to Saudi Arabia is not going to be without its controversy. But there we are. He's being sent, he's being deployed, and let's see what we get out of it.
It makes a lot of sense to deploy the royal family to the monarchies of the Gulf.
So William Patey was our ambassador to Saudi Arabia from 2006 to 2010. He knows the kingdom well and the effect our own can have there.
They love it. I mean, they regard the British royal family as the top of the tree. In the Gulf, we always wanted the royal family to come more often than perhaps the Foreign Office would allow them. When I was there, Prince Charles, as the Crown Prince, came twice. And he over a couple of decades, he visited Saudi Arabia 12 times, and he was always a great visitor. And the point is, and I think the point of Prince William going, is that he will reach a broad cross-section of the Saudi royal family. And of course, the Saudi royal family is massive. He's about the same age as the Crown Prince. So they'll be around for quite a long time together. So getting that bond going will be brilliant in terms of soft power influence. And all the princes around the crown prince, he's the big decision maker, but he has surrounded himself with ministers and royal advisors who are all about the same age. So sending a younger royal who's going to be the king is a brilliant investment, and it doesn't surprise me that the Foreign Office have come to the conclusion if Prince William's going to make one visit, it's to Saudi Arabia.
But how pally does it get? You mentioned that when you were there, Prince Charles, as he was there when he was Prince of Wales, went along for a trip. I mean, is it pally? Is it jovial? Is it prince meeting prince? Or is it very stately with an agenda and a clear purpose?
Charles got on very well with them. He has a very easygoing manner. They would often have different occasions, very different from what ministers would do. So they don't sit around and talk about trade and politics all the time. They'll talk about world events in a more casual way. And when Prince Charles came, he struck up a very close relationship with Prince Khalid Al Faisal, who was an artist, and they had a shared love of painting. So they went off and painted together. Prince Sultan bin Salman, when Prince Charles came out, an elder half brother of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, they had a love of preserving heritage, and that's what Sultan bin Salman they bonded over. So they'll bond over their interests. I mean, Prince William was interested in polo and horses, and the Saudis love horses. I don't know what his fondness for camels is. There'll be things they can bond over. If Prince William shares any of his grandmother's interest in horses and horse racing, and then they'll bond over footy. I mean, Prince William's an Aston Villa fan. The Saudis have bought Newcastle, so they'll be able to joke about football. I would expect the visit will be formed around getting to know you. And the trade and investment stuff, which is what the government want, will come almost as a side product to that. He'll be briefed to talk about investment and British investment in Saudi Arabia and Saudi investment. But the meat of this visit, I suspect, will be about building relationships.
William's absolutely right. When we got the official notice that William was doing this trip, there was an emphasis, yes, on trade and investment, but also as the UK approaches 100 years of diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia next year. So building that relationship, getting to know each other, crown prince to crown prince, we expect him to obviously hold talks with MBS. Yes, there are definitely things that the government wants to push over the line. But in terms of bonding, William's absolutely right. There is going to be a football engagement on the agenda. As William makes the point, I think MBS is around 41. William is 43. They're men of a similar age. But yes, there will be underneath all of that clear objectives that the government wants to ensure it gets out of this flying visit.
What are the things that they would like him to push?
From my understanding, and having spoken to our Deputy Political Editor, Harry York, spoke to various political sources around this last week, and the things that they're very keen on are, at the moment, there are negotiations with some of the Gulf states, Saudi included, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, in order to unlock a free trade arrangement. That's still not over the line. I think there's hope that this might help, move it forwards in a kind of diplomatic way. There's talk about more trade of fighter jets, the Global Combat Air Programme, GCAP. That's something else that's going to be in William's briefing notes. But under all of that, we have had Keir Starmer there in the last couple of years. We have had the Chancellor there. I think William is being sent not to shove pieces of paper under officials' noses and get deals signed, but to export UK PLC on a different kind of diplomatic level.
And is he good at that in your experience, Roya?
He is good at that, because I have travelled the world with him and I have seen the likes of Donald Trump kind of putty in his hands. And whether William, likes that or not, and he's certainly got his own views on it in private, I think he knows he's quite good at it too. And I think there is something about William being sort of relatively young on the sort of international stage, but also having quite a lot of his father and his grandmother having been such a respected head of state who was around for so long, that he's sort of able to bring this kind of more modern approach to diplomacy and royal diplomacy, but with, the elements and the sort of history of his grandmother with him. And I think the Saudis, the Gulf states, the other monarchies, so to speak, they respect that. They respond positively to that.
And actually, the late Queen could be quite pushy with the Saudis. Wasn't there some business when one of them visited, was it Windsor? And she, took them quite by surprise.
Balmoral. Yeah, it's one of William's predecessors, actually, an ambassador called Sir Sherard Cowper-Coles, who actually wrote about this anecdote in the Sunday Times when the late Queen died in 2022. And it was during a visit by Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia in 1988. He came to the UK on a visit, and he went up to Balmoral during this visit while he was seeing sort of various government ministers to see the Queen. And of course, at the time, if you're a woman, you couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia. You couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia as a woman until 2018. And they had lunch at Balmoral, and the Queen said to him, "Would you like a tour of the estate?" And he agreed. And so he was sort of motioned to get into one of the Royal Land Rovers. And to his absolute surprise and slight shock, she got into the driver's seat and drove him around the estate. And not only drove him around the estate, absolutely herred around the estate, like tearing around. And he kept asking his interpreter to ask the Queen to slow down. There was an anecdote later where Sherard Coles said to, I think, his counterpart, Her Majesty steers the ship of state slightly more steadily than she drives a Land Rover. For me, that anecdote, there's something about the diplomatic sort of mastery of the Queen there, kind of asserting her power over the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Abdullah loved that. He told me afterwards he was absolutely terrified.
Yeah.
And when he came back on a visit, when he was king, he was crown prince when he went to Balmoral, and the Queen drove him. And he came back for a formal state visit. He came on a state visit when I was the ambassador. And he was still chuckling about it, that he was absolutely terrified with the Queen driving because she drove so fast.
But I think things like that just show. I don't think, the Prime Minister would drive him round, hair around. There's something about members of the royal family, and Abdullah would have dined out on that anecdote for years, and that is the soft power that the royal family can bring.
Well, it was absolutely that. When you're pressing for human rights, for changes and reform in Saudi Arabia, both Her Majesty the Queen, when she visited Saudi, her visit to Saudi was in the late 70s. So she was around for a long time. And King Salman, the Crown Prince's father, will remember the Queen's visit. So this is an asset unique to us in many ways that we can use in the Gulf monarchies. So I think Britain is quite keen to get the Crown Prince to Britain, no matter how controversial that might be.
We are talking about Prince William's imminent visit to Saudi Arabia with Roy Nicol, Sunday Times royal editor, and Sir William Patey, who was once our man in Saudi Arabia. You mentioned a moment ago, William, that, of course, the current de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is a somewhat controversial figure. Before we get to that, he has actually shifted Saudi Arabia quite a bit, socially and economically. How so when we compare it to, a decade ago when the late Queen was chatting with his predecessor?
In a decade, he's moved it phenomenally. In the last 5 years, I've been going to Saudi Arabia, at least once a year, every year since I retired. And my connection with Saudi Arabia goes back to 1995. So I've sort of got a 30-year time span of this. And for 20 odd years, nothing happened. There was a load of talk about reform and not very much happened. And that was, I suppose, because the consensual decision-making of the Saudi system, even though you had a king, you had very prominent princes. When King Abdullah was in power for over 10 years, he had the Prince Sultan and Prince Naif and Prince Salman. They were big figures with their own ministries and their own power bases. And you had a very powerful religious establishment that constrained a lot of the sort of reforms that people wanted. And the one thing that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been able to do is to consolidate power in his hands. So he's a much more powerful figure than any of the individual princes ever were.
Just explain what those reforms are, though. What has actually been done?
The most obvious one is women being able to drive, but most of the restrictions that were imposed through culture and religion in Saudi Arabia have been lifted. There were a series of ludicrous things to a modern woman in the West. Women couldn't drive, they couldn't check into a hotel without the husband's permission, they couldn't travel without their husband's permission, they weren't allowed to work in mixed environments. All that has been swept aside. and the religious establishment have been essentially put in their place. And so the very young population in Saudi Arabia are enjoying freedoms that they've never had before. And that's opening the way to a diversification of the Saudi economy, which was absolutely necessary because of their dependence on oil income, and they needed to diverse away from that. And these social and economic reforms are opening up tourism and other forms of business.
But all of that hasn't necessarily been milk and honey, has it? I mean, just to take the example of that enormous, the Line project, which was going to be that, ludicrously enormous, mirrored, horizontal city, that's been massively scaled back. Some of the hope of the new Saudi Arabia, non-entirely oil-based, is having falters. I mean, are they worried about the progress of things?
The Line project, the Line city, was a kind of statement of modernist intent, and has had to be scaled back, and will be, if it's ever delivered, will be delivered on a much longer timescale. But other stuff is going ahead. There's a big project just outside Riyadh called Qiddiya, which is a massive Orlando-style Disney World. And Six Flags, the big American company, have just opened their theme park there. And that is going to be a city, an adjunct to Riyadh of 200,000 people, with theme parks, Formula One racing track, golf courses. What they're trying to do is to get Saudis to spend their money in Saudi Arabia instead of in Europe. Once they've done that, they'll then want to attract other Arabs to spend money in Saudi Arabia. And once they've done that, they'll be saying to the world, come and visit Saudi Arabia.
Which, if you are a palace courtier organising a foreign trip, all sounds marvellous. But of course, in the background to all of this is what's happening geopolitically in terms of Saudi Arabia's involvement and preference in various conflicts, but also the scandal which still hangs over Mohammed bin Salman after the murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, which US intelligence said that he had basically ordered that. Are the palace on edge, Roya, about putting Prince William into actually what is quite a complicated foreign relationship for the UK?
I don't think they're on edge about it. I think they're very alive to the sensitivities of the trip. What I don't think we're going to see, which is perhaps why they feel less on edge about it, is we're not going to see an Oval Office style press call like we did with MBS when he went to the White House recently, and of course was absolutely monstered by journalists calling out about, Jamal Khashoggi.
Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office. Why should Americans trust you?
Regardless of the fact that Donald Trump intervened and said, well, don't be so rude to my guest, he knew nothing about it.
He's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that.
You then had MBS say, it happened on my watch. It was an awful mistake, which was quite a moment.
About the journalists, it's really painful to hear, anyone that been losing his life for, no real purpose or nothing illegal way. And it's been painful for us in Saudi Arabia. We've did all the right steps of investigation, etc. in Saudi Arabia, and we've improved our system to be sure that nothing happened like that, and it's painful and it's a huge mistake, and we are doing our best that this doesn't happen again.
We're not going to have a repeat of that. There is expected to be a meeting with MBS, but I don't think you will have 30 reporters there, and so there is a slight protection around that. Prince William is, the Middle East is a region he follows very closely. He does, of course, follow news very closely. He will be fully aware of a lot of people thinking it's a bit rum that he's going off to Saudi Arabia and going to be rubbing shoulders with, let's be honest, someone who still runs that regime like a dictator. He might want to persuade the world he's a reforming dictator, but he still runs it like a dictator. So this is the price of international diplomacy that members of the royal family pay, and they know it's a big part of their job. Quite recently, we've hosted Donald Trump for a state visit. He's another very divisive leader, both at home and abroad. But, the royal family know that part of their job is to roll out the red carpet for divisive world leaders. And They are very good at it. The question is what we get out of these visits.
Well, I don't think we'll be able to tot up what we've got out of this visit. This is about long-term relationships. It's about creating a sense of goodwill in Saudi Arabia. If that leads to decisions that lead to investment in this country or investment in Saudi Arabia, if it leads to removing any of the obstacles that may still be there to a UK GCC free trade agreement, it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's others, these will all be positive things. This is about soft power. This is the biggest instrument of soft power Britain has, and we're deploying it in Saudi Arabia. We've had state visits by dictators to the UK. We do business with countries that are dictators. The Prime Minister's just been to China. Xi Jinping has just dismissed the second most powerful man, and so dictatorship, I'm afraid, is a bit of a norm in the world as opposed to nice constitutional monarchies. So you have to deal with that. It's part of life.
Yes, and the royal family do, don't they? That's part. It's a big part of their job description these days.
What do you think the biggest pitfalls will be for William? Because thinking about the concerns about him going to Saudi Arabia, we have recently had a Saudi dissident in the UK saying to Prince William, you need to bring up human rights and the rest. I mean, do you think any of that will hang over? Do you think there'll be any pitfalls on that front, or is it easy to avoid?
I don't know whether there'll be pitfalls. I think there are probably opportunities, and it's whether or not William takes those opportunities, most likely behind closed doors. I was quite interested to learn that there isn't a government minister travelling with him. Quite often on these trips you get, when the King and Queen go on big overseas visits, you very often have the Foreign Secretary travelling with them or a Foreign Office minister. There isn't one on this occasion. But then again, William has a very, very capable private secretary in Ian Patrick who knows the halls of soft power extremely well. Saudi Arabia, and I've not been to Saudi Arabia, this will be my first visit, and William may be able to advise better, but it doesn't strike me like the kind of country where you're going to get people turning up at events able to shout out things about distance and Khashoggi. Yeah. So I think the opportunities for pitfalls and embarrassing moments or hairy moments will be almost non-existent.
Yeah, I would be surprised if the King hasn't given Prince William advice, because actually,
he definitely has.
As Prince Charles, he was brilliant at dealing. I'm probably talking out of school here, but of all the people I ever received in Saudi Arabia who raised the subject of human rights, Prince Charles was by far the most effective.
Well, yes, and we know he feels very strongly about it.
How did he do it?
It was done quietly in a way that the Saudis noted it, but he didn't create any controversy. When he was the Crown Prince from Prince Charles, he did it brilliantly. I always thought he was marvellous at it.
I know that William has spoken to his father about the trip. I was told that last week when I was writing the piece about it. And as William's mentioned, Charles, having been to Saudi Arabia so many times and understanding how diplomacy works over there, I think, again, that sort of relationship and that history and, the ability of Charles and his experience to be able to talk to William about, if you're going to raise human rights, you might want to do it this way, is very, very valuable on a trip like this.
A question about Prince William's work ethic. One of you mentioned earlier on that this is the only trip he's doing this year so far on the behest of the government, of the Foreign Office. And there is a kind of pervading opinion about Prince William that he's a bit work shy and could be putting in a bit more effort. Or is that fair? Is that the case?
So the one thing I would say on the trips is he has several other trips that he'll be doing this year. He's almost certainly going to be going to the United States to mark independence in the summer, but that will be an invitation from Donald Trump, not the government. He is going to go to India in the autumn for the Earthshot Prize, Environmental Prize, but again, that's one of his own initiatives. So there's going to be plenty more overseas travel. In terms of his work ethic, I think William has always been very clear on, particularly in the last few years where we've seen both his wife and his father go through cancer treatment, he's always been very clear that for him, it's that buzzword for him, is an impact over the quantity of engagement. So he does do those kind of, I wouldn't want to say boring, but he does do those kind of more bread and butter trips around the country, the away days. But he's much more interested in sort of combining them with his own causes and his own sort of cause-driven work. And in terms of sort of number of engagements, if you look at his polling, where his polling is, for the last few years, he has consistently, along with his wife, been the most popular member of the royal family. above the likes of Charles and Anne, who do way more engagements. And I think that's because he's been very loud and clear, despite criticism from some areas of the media of him being work shy, that I'm going to put my young family first and foremost, and that, work will be put around that and prioritise that. So he doesn't tend to do engagements or trips during the school holidays. But look, the public seem to respond to that positively. And I think in his back pocket is the pretty tricky time he had as a young prince growing up in a royal family with a very difficult home life. He's taken the view to prioritise his family. It might mean he does less engagements than his aunt and his father, but actually in the sort of modern monarchy going forwards, the majority of the public who are for the royal family seem to respond very positively towards that approach.
What do you say to that, Sir William, as somebody who's made use of the royals in the past? Fair enough, or pull your finger out?
No, give him a break. He's a 40-something guy with 3 young kids. He's bringing up a future king. His wife's had cancer. I think he's absolutely right to focus on the stuff he could do. You can get Michael McIntyre to open a supermarket. There are plenty of people around who can, Coronation Street stars who can open. That's not a good use of the Crown Prince's time, in my view. And I'm a Republican. I'm one of those Republicans who actually thinks that we have a pretty decent monarchy and the system works, so why change it? But I give the guy a break.
Very finally, Sir William, you've obviously been to Saudi Arabia lots and lived there for a while. Roy, it's your first time. Any tips for Roy, Sir William? Any nice places to eat? Anything to do?
I'm a big horse racing fan, and I know there's the Saudi Cup on. Big horse racing meeting this week, William, isn't there?
You loads of horse racing. The restaurants are fabulous, and you'll have a lovely time avoiding alcohol, which I'm sure your doctors told you to do.
I think it'll be a very good detox, William, while I'm out in Saudi.
Although if you stay close to the British ambassador, he might take pity on you.
That was former UK Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Sir William Patey, and Roy Nikar, who is Royal Editor of the Sunday Times and co-host of the Royals podcast, along with Kate Mansi. They are both off to Saudi Arabia to cover the royal visit. So if you want to hear more about it, you can listen to their special episode later this week. Just search for The Royals with Roy and Kate wherever you get your podcasts. That is about it from us. If you've got any questions or suggestions, you can email us at any time. thestory@thetimes.com is how to contact us. The producers today were Julia Webster and Michaela Arneson. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. Sound design and theme composition was Maula Seto. And I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.